Welcome to Book Talks with Colors of Influence. I am your host, Maylene Hamto. I'm an avid reader and reviewer of books for my book blog, Colors of Influence, and I also review books for outlets and platforms such as City Books, Halo Review, Book Sirens, Readsy, and the Nonfiction Authors Association. So, Book Talks focuses on fiction and nonfiction works that highlight issues of diverse identities, equity and inclusion, social justice, decolonial approaches to the struggle of liberation. I talk to authors whose works contribute to the nuanced understanding of various cross cultural contexts of our shared humanity and common dreams. The works featured in this web series reveal essential truths about the author's unique perspectives. So today I am joined by Elizabeth Ann Besa Quirino, an award-winning journalist, cookbook author, food writer, memoirist, correspondent, and a previous college professor and former ad agency copywriter and creative director. She blogs and develops recipes about Filipino home cooking on her popular website, The Quirino Kitchen, thequarinokitchen.com. She is also an multi-award winner of the Plaridel Writing Awards for Excellence in Journalism that is given by the Philippine American Press Club in San Francisco, California. She is the recipient of a Doreen Gamboa Fernandez Food Writing Award for her essay, 100 Mangoes in a Bottle. She was named as one of the Filipino Women's Network 100 Most Influential Women of the World. So she wrote and published a food and history memoir, Every Ounce of Courage, a daughter's reflections on her mother's bravery. This is a story of her mother, Lulu Reyes Besa, a World War II Filipina heroine and a recipient of the U.S. Medal of Freedom. Elizabeth Ann narrates the stories of courage, compassion, family, and also includes Filipino recipes. Betty Ann, as she is fondly called, was born in the Philippines and raised in Tarlac province, where her way of life was molded early by her parents' farming and agricultural business. Her childhood home was well known to friends and family as the home along the highway, a welcome stopover conveniently halfway between Manila and Baguio. And she learned to cook from her mother, Lulu, who made dishes from the fresh produce grown by her father, Gualberto Besa, in their backyard and farm in Tarlac. Memories of these special meals were the inspiration for her three cookbooks. So, with Every Ounce of Courage, this book has received some great and rave reviews, and I quote, women in between her family stories Woven in between her family stories is a mouth-watering description of Filipino food and recipes. This reviewer said, I had such a unique experience reading Every Ounce of Courage. I was riveted, moved, and inspired. And at the same time, I was hungry for dishes from my home country. I loved every page, every bite. And this other reviewer mentioned, read this memoir if you want to learn about what life was like for one family during the early 20th century in the Philippines. If you want to know what World War II in the Philippines was like from the perspective of a Filipina trying to do her part. If you like food writing, if you are interested in mothers and daughters, and if you are inspired to read about a woman who is brought from the margins of other stories to the center of her own book. And the last piece that I will read says, 3 generations of mother and daughter relationships are joined by love and the passion for food, and its preparation comes alive in the narratives and invite the reader to savor their recipes and experience life's joys and sadness and the bittersweet. So welcome, Betty Ann, and thank you for joining Book Talks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mylene. Thank you for having me on Book Talk. And I'd like to say hello to everyone who's listening right now. I'm very honored and happy to be here.
Yes, Betty Ann, thank you so much I'm really excited about our conversation today. And so jumping right in, your book has beautifully merged your culinary passion, your expertise with your literary gifts. And of course, you are well known for your cooking blog and recipes that where you really highlight Filipino cuisines, the beauty of our and the culinary taste of our culture. If you could share with us, what is the significance of publishing this book during this period in your career?
Well, thanks for asking. That's a good question. There are not enough stories about Filipina heroines right now. We live in a very complicated, complex world where so much is happening and things happen every second. And I notice a lack of um, heroines or people that are young that the younger generation can look up. Um, I I noticed there's not enough books also written by Filipino authors that are nonfiction about bravery, heroism, and the beautiful culture and history of our Filipino people. Um, there are there are many authors. There are many Filipino and Asian authors, but not enough in this genre. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Betty Ann. And again, beautifully written and very heartfelt. Even though, our families are worlds apart now, it really brought me back home, right? And so I also wanted to highlight that you began the narrative with a fateful call that you received from an American soldier during that time, Corporal Robert Dow. Uh, and he told you that his life was saved by your mom's brave efforts to help prisoners during World War II. So, can you share a little bit about how the affirmation from Robert Dow may have evolved your views about your family's history, about your mom, and all that?
Mm. Yeah. That was a surprise phone call. It was unexpected, out of the blue. Um, I never imagined, not even in my dreams, something like that will happen. One night, I was baking ensaymada, which most bakers know takes 1 or 2 days to bake. And it was late at night. I was alone in the kitchen, and the phone rang. It was close to midnight, and because of the lateness of the hour, and because I was busy with my hands full of butter and cheese, I hesitated to answer the phone, so I let the machine pick up the message. And an old man's voice came on the machine, someone I didn't recognize. This was over 20 years ago. Okay. And he said, his message was, "You don't know me, but your mother saved my life. And I have been searching for her for over 50 years." And at that point, I dropped everything literally that I was doing and ran to the phone to catch the call before he hung up. And we talked, and he introduced himself, and he told me how he found me through one of my mother's longtime best friends, Mrs. Nini Quezon Abansenya, the daughter of President Manuel Quezon. When he mentioned my godmother's name, I knew it was not prank. I knew it was an authentic phone call. So we got to talking, and it was, to be honest, I was floored. I was surprised because I never heard this story. I never heard about this man, and that's the turning point. That was the catalyst. That was the time I realized the magnitude of my mother's bravery and how much she risked her life during World War II, bringing aid to POWs, Americans and Filipinos. And that led me to finding out more about her life during the war, because by the time Robert Dow contacted me, Um, I my mother had already passed away many years before that, so I there was hardly anyone to ask. So that started my journey of reading and research, and with regular phone calls from Robert Dow, we became friends, and he told me stories about the war, about his incarceration, the horrible, inhumane conditions of prison camps, and how much my mother risked her life. There were many heart pounding stories that he told me, and I could not believe that the woman he was describing was the same person who raised me and nurtured me, from babyhood to adulthood. So it was it was mind blowing, to say the least. But I have to point out that that did not that did not spur right away my motivation to write a book. In, in, in fact, I was hesitant to do that. It was Robert Dow who kept convincing me and convincing me that it was time to tell my mother's story. It was time to tell the world who she was and what she did. It took a lot of convincing from him for me to finally realize, yes, her story was worth telling.
Yeah, and again, thank you for, kind of pouring your heart into this work. Your mother's story is as much your story as well as you also integrate your own narrative into, your journey of self-discovery as you were working on this in the story. And I understand that the cover design for the book was the vision and creation of your son, Tim Carino, and I also understand that there's a really interesting backstory behind the photo used for the cover. And so I'll go ahead and reshare my screen so we can take a look at that cover again. Yeah, and so that was the question, Betty Ann, if you could share a little bit about the backstory of the cover and the photo used.
Well, thank you. It's an interesting backstory. First of all, um, I have to say I'm very proud of the book cover design. My son Tim Quirino was the book cover designer. He's a product designer by profession, and he works in a one of these tech companies in Silicon Valley. I asked him, um, not as a mother, but I asked him as an author if he could do the book cover of my book, only because I believe in his work and I knew he knew my mother's story. So what better way to put together all the generations than by asking my mother's grandson to do the book cover. Anyway, the backstory is that many years ago, and Tim was still in college, he chanced upon this photograph of my mother. Imagine it without the book title. It was a black and white horizontal 8 by 11 photograph. I was fixing photo albums, and he says, "Whoa, this is a beautiful shot." He said, "It's very well taken." And mom, he said, "This is a book cover waiting to happen." And at that point, I had no idea. I, it was farthest from my mind that I was going to write a memoir, a history memoir, a food memoir. I had no intention at that time. So I I tucked away that piece of wisdom from my son, the product designer. And I thought, yes, someday when that happens, when I write a book, I will consider using this photo of my mom. This actually was her engagement photo. Just before she and my father got married in 1953, their wedding was a very much anticipated event because they were both much older than regular couples, and my mother had a wide circle of friends, and she worked as a post-war. She worked in public relations, so she knew all the news media at that time, newspapers. She knew all the editors, and one of the editors was the Manila Chronicle ed- lifestyle editor, was a good friend of hers, and they arranged for a pictorial of their engagement. Well, at that time, it was not yet the vogue or the fashion or the trend to do engagement photos. So the Manila Chronicle wanted to do this, wanted to have a Sunday spread for their Sunday edition of Miss Lulu Reyes, philanthropic humanitarian aid worker, marries a farmer. And my father was an agricultural businessman and farmer by profession from Tarlac. So it was like the title of the lifestyle story in the society page was going to be "The Farmer Takes a Wife." So the entire team plus the engaged couple, my parents, Gilberto Besa and Lulu Reyes, went to shoot to do the photo shoot, and I believe it was somewhere in Antipolo. So they found a farm looking outdoor venue. My father, being a farmer by profession, came the way he was, the way he dresses for work, khaki pants and uh a t-shirt, a regular white t-shirt. So photo shoot day, the intern approaches him, the young production intern of the newspaper approaches him and asks him, "Sir, can you please change into this clothes?" She had a set of clothes from, like we do now, from a famous clothing company. My father refused. He was a very non-pretentious, down to earth, low key kind of person. That's the way my father was. And being a farmer and agriculturist, he had no idea what public relations was. And least of all, he didn't like this photo shoot, but he went along because it was his fiance friends, and the whole thing was going to be captured in the newspaper. He was being asked to change clothes into something that's not his style. So he told the young production assistant, he said, "Let me get this straight. You want me to change into those clothes and pretend to be a farmer when I'm a farmer and I don't wear those? So no, I'm not changing." And the poor girl ran back to her editor crying. Meanwhile, they're losing light, so the photographer was panicking. The sun was setting as they're all arguing. The editor worried that she will not have her spread, and it will be an empty space on Sunday. And the poor intern thought that she was going to be fired because she didn't get the talent to change clothes. And my mother stepped up, and my mother, the fiance, knew that it was time to use her negotiation skills and to solve the problem altogether. My grandmother was on the set, Lola Nena, and you know how old people tend to speak out what they think without thinking. And she said in a very loud voice, "¿Qué pasa? What's happening?" in Spanish. And it was explained to her that the groom to be did not want to change clothes, farmer clothes. The whole thing was explained to her, and my Lola said, "Ay, qué vergüenza." Very loud for my father to hear, like, oh, how embarrassing. So my mom, the charming person that she is, negotiated with everyone. She approached her fiance, her boyfriend, and talked to my father. And I don't exactly know what they talk about, but it was between them. It was very private, and a compromise was reached. So my mother said, "Okay, problem solved." She said to the photographer, "We'll shoot in 5 minutes." And then she told the editor, "Don't worry, you will have your story." And she and as the editor, "Do not fire the poor girl. It's not her fault that my fiance doesn't want to change clothes." Okay. Shooting went, photo shoot went. It's a lovely picture of my mother, her profile, wearing a headscarf. And the title of the lifestyle story was "The Farmer Takes a Wife." If you can see from the book cover, there is a farm. Okay, there are plants, there are bushes, there's a field, there's a nice sky, there are clouds. She's dressed in like, farm like clothes. She's beautiful. It's a farm setting, but there is no farmer. You know, it's an engagement picture without the groom to be, but nobody noticed really because no, regular readers did not know the backstory until I'm telling you now. But this was the story my mother told me years and years after. It was resolved, and then my mother talked to my lola, her mama, and told her, "Mama, this is the reason why I'm marrying him. I fell in love with a person who does not pretend to be what he is not." And she was right. Shooting went on, and here it is. And many, many years after, that was 1953, and today we're in the year 2025, I used the beautiful engagement photo as a book cover. It's very descriptive of the time and the place and the personality of my mother. The rural setting, um, during the war and after the war, this was their life.
Yeah. And it really captures the richness of sort of, Filipino, not just aesthetics, but also our culture, right? And the stories in the book, I mean, I know this wasn't part of the book, but you are such a gifted storyteller and you really bring, characters to life. And of course, these are, your family members and, really close to your heart in terms of these stories that you have grown up with and part of the family ethos and really shows sort of the values that Filipinos uphold as important, right? Like your father not wanting to pretend and being true to who he is, and your mother really defending him and making sure that there is integrity in that whole communication. And that story also illustrates how what a great negotiator your mom is, and that's why she was able to do the courageous things that she was able to do during the war. And people really need to read this book because it shows you know so much bravery on a woman who you would not think or believe would have that kind of presence, because so many folks in our culture are still kind of hidden and unrecognized. But again, many thanks to you for sharing this story. Now, reading Every Ounce of Courage, I understood deeply the experiences of our elders and our ancestors who lived through the war. Both my maternal and paternal grandparents, you know, suffered a lot as well. And of course, every Filipino in the diaspora will, as I mentioned, will benefit from knowing this history. And of course, other folks too who, have an interest in, um, American history, and how the wars that have been part of our ethos as Americans have affected other parts of the world. So before I ask you to kindly read an excerpt from the book, can you share your favorite story in the book? I understand that it's different. So
Yes. My favorite story of the book is the love story of my grandparents, Judge Ponciano Reyes Sr. and Luz Hugo Reyes. They were the parents of my mother, Lulu. Their love story began in 1912, more than 100 years ago, turn of the century, and the setting was in Capiz, because my great grandfather, Simplicio Hugo, the father of Lola Nena, was the was the first governor of Capiz. He was appointed by Governor General Taft for that position. Now, one day, imagine 1912, the young lady, 15-year-old Luz Hugo, was called Nena by the family, was sitting by the bay window, combing her long hair, which reached nearly to the ground. She had just washed her hair, and she was trying to dry it by the window, combing her long, lustrous locks. When outside, across their home in the Plazuela, a young lawyer named Ponciano Reyes was walking during his lunch. Ponciano Reyes was a rising star in the judiciary system at that time in the Philippines, and he had just returned from a scholarship in the United States where he had studied part of his law degree. So he was assigned to be one of the fiscals in Capiz. He was 21 years old. He was a bachelor. He's walking during, it was noontime, and he looks up and sees this beautiful young lady by the window with her long, shiny hair. She's combing her hair. He instantly, without knowing who she was, he instantly fell in love. Now, society norms at that time in 1912 were different from what it is now. Ponciano Reyes knew that in order for him to meet this beautiful woman who he had fallen in love with, in order for him to meet her, he needed to find a relative of hers to formally introduce him to the family. But his heart was beating so fast, he could not wait for that kind of decorum to happen. That will take days and weeks, he was thinking. So, without thinking and just following his heart, he ran across the plazuela. He knew that that house was the house of the former governor, and he knocked on the door to bravely and boldly introduce himself and ask if he could meet the young woman. Okay, this is 1912. Things like that don't happen. A young man doesn't come to your door asking to meet a young woman. So Nena, from her window, saw that this young man had approached their house and was now knocking loudly on their door. It's lunch. And she had the feeling he was there to meet her. She had that sense of that premonition. So, being 15 years old, she was very shy. She ran to her bedroom to hide. In her haste, she left behind by the window her velvet slippers. Okay, she must have had tiny feet because when Ponciano Reyes was allowed to enter the living room to talk to her mother, he saw the dainty little slippers that she left behind by the window. And according to my mom, he fell even more in love. He was smitten just by the sight of the slipper. Okay, again, to young people these days, that's unimaginable because we have so much, our world is totally different now. But that to me was one of the sweetest stories ever. And it's been my favorite love story for as long as I've been hearing it since I was a child. So they he courted her. He was formally introduced to her by Lola Juana, Lola Nena's mother, and a year later they married when she was 16. And their first baby, a girl, was my mother, Lourdes. They named her Lourdes and nicknamed her Lulu, and they had three children, three more, four children.
How romantic, Betty Ann.
I know. Now every young girl who hears this story is going to run by the window and start combing their hair.
We don't hear stories like that anymore. And it really harkens back to how, sort of the romance of, Philippines during that era, living.
But now we live in gated communities, in townhouses, in condos. There's no window where we can comb our hair and a young man is going to see. It's not going to happen unless your house looks like turn of the century, wide open space. You know, the windows at that time were from floor to ceiling. Remember, houses didn't have air conditioning. If you look at pictures of vintage houses, their windows were part of the wall, actually. So you could sit there all day and enjoy the breeze.
Enjoyed, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that is my favorite love story, and I can say it over. I can retell it over and over again to anyone who wants to listen because it's like such a romantic story. Like his heart was beating, and he just my grandfather just let go of all the social norms being formally introduced. Felt I have to do this.
How to do it, how to take that risk. And he fell, he fell right in love. Sounds like, it could be part of a movie script, Betty Ann, for sure.
I know. Well, that in my writing, I wanted to tell that story first, so that readers fall in love with the characters of the story and how romantic and how sweet and beautiful, and then you put it against the contrast of war a few chapters after, and the horror and the inhumane conditions of the poor prisoners, and then you remember the times, those beautiful times of courtship and love and romance. Well, this is life. You know, one day you're a young pretty girl combing your hair by the window, and the next chapters, you know, your loved ones are missing in action during the war. So that is the way life is. And then after several years of war, life slowly gets back to normal. And then you have another love story. My parents' love story was another one, which is my favorite. So you know, it goes, and then they have children, and this is me telling the story. So that's the way life is.
The way life is, and life goes on despite all the grief and hardship, and those experiences, change us all forever, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't destroy us. So yeah. And so, because we're talking story, can I ask you to read a section of the book that all readers, that in your opinion, all readers must absolutely read? And so, this is actually my favorite part of these interviews is getting the authors to read a part of the book that is their favorite as well. So,
Well,
yeah.
thank you. Well, thank you. I'm going to read from my an excerpt from my book Every Ounce of Courage, and I'm going to read an excerpt from chapter 6, The Search for Willie. And Willie Reyes was the younger brother of my mom, Lulu. He had, this is the background to readers, he had enlisted with the Philippine Scouts right after Pearl Harbor was bombed in December 1941. So he was a captured uh, and imprisoned. He was captured and he had to endure the horrific Bataan Death March, and he had to endure the inhumane conditions of the prison. So I'll read the story. On this Thursday afternoon, Lulu joined the rest of the family to listen intently to the latest radio dispatch from the Voice of Freedom, which was being broadcast from a makeshift station in the Balinta Tunnel complex beneath Corregidor. The announcer, Third Lieutenant Norman Reyes, gravely intoned a brief introduction before speaking the words no one wanted to hear. He said, Bataan has fallen. The Philippine American troops on this war ravaged and blood-stained peninsula have laid down their arms. With heads bloody but unbowed, they have yielded to the superior force and numbers of the enemy. That was the announcement. The announcement left the family stunned, silent, and unmoving until Mama Nena let out a guttural cry and collapsed to the floor. Mi hijo, Diyos mío, mi hijo, my son, my son. God, my son, cried. Struggling to keep herself from breaking down as well, Lulu held her sobbing mother. The last time she had seen her parents so bereft and inconsolable was Christmas Day, 24 years ago. Mama, no llores. Le vamos buscar a Willie, she promised. Mama, don't cry. We will look for Willie. But even as Lulu made the vow, doubt and fear amplified her grief. Where will she start? How will she find him? Was he even still alive? The next days and weeks were filled with desperate attempts to locate Willie or find some clue regarding his fate. The family heard approximately 70,000 soldiers were captured at Bataan, were being marched to a prison camp in Tarlac, and they hoped he might be among them. Lulu used all means of communication available, from letters to phone calls to telegrams, contact everyone on her formidable list of friends. But no one could confirm Willie's whereabouts or even if he had survived the battle. In the meantime, Lulu threw herself into relief work with the Chaplains Aid Association and other humanitarian groups. Less than a week after the surrender at Bataan, Helena Benitez mobilized the Girls in Blue after receiving an emotional phone call from Josefa Escoda, a prominent Manila social worker who had just witnessed the brutal treatment and distressing condition of captive soldiers as they arrived in San Fernando, Pampanga. The VSAC volunteers, including Lulu, wasted no time gathering relief supplies they could find or solicit. Pharmacists gave whatever they could spare. At the Bureau of Plant Industry, the country's preeminent food scientist, chemist Maria Orosa, provided them with energy rich juice powder made from native citrus calamansi. The girls, Lulu among them, distributed the much needed supplies to various prisons and internment camps. Lulu soon realized her involvement with relief organizations will be her best hope of finding Willie. Humanitarian aid workers were the only civilians allowed to enter the camps and interact with any person. Knowing she was unlikely to be allowed to visit among the military internees, Lulu figured the Jesuit mission and the Chaplains Aid Association presented a perfect opportunity to talk to imprisoned clerics who were permitted to hold religious services to the POWs. She knew this priest will be her eyes and ears in the search for her brother. Thank
Oh, Betty Ann, yeah, and that really starts a lot of the brave feats that your mother as you told in the book, right?
you. I wanted readers to be able to relate. Like, this is the story of a family. All of us have families, and we have a mother, and we have siblings, and whether or not you have a sibling, there's always a loved one that you care for. And what if that sibling, that brother, goes missing? At that time, we don't have they didn't have the communications we do now. You could only do phone calls, and phone calls then were you had manual operators, not you didn't dial. Phone calls, telegrams, letters. That was the only way. And where do you start looking for a missing person? You know, there is a war going on. There's no one to call. What, you're going to pick up the phone and call the Philippine Army? No one's going to pick up that phone. No one's going to answer you. So just I wanted the readers to be able to identify with that feeling of your loved one missing. Where, how do you begin? Meanwhile, your mother collapsed on the ground, on the floor, and you're worried about her health. You're worried about how she's taking it all in. So and there's a war going on, so it's chaos. So, uh, war has been present in our lifetime so much. Maybe not in the countries we live in anymore, but somewhere in the world, this is happening to people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I wanted the readers to get that feeling of pain and loss and worry and uncertainty and waiting. I think that's the worst, uncertainty and the waiting and not knowing.
Not knowing exactly.
The
Yeah.
dread, you know. Plus, you're also afraid that the enemy will come knocking on your door and capture all of you. There's also that. So yeah. So I try to capture all that in my writing.
Yeah. And you did so in such a heartfelt and beautiful way, and at the same time, you did not kind of turn away from how horrible that whole situation was, right? Even for your family that that had means, that had connections, etc., but everyone suffered during that war. And it would have been just easy for your mom and for your family to be out in the province
And
and
hide.
yeah, yeah, and hide, exactly. And she didn't. She went straight into enemy territory to look for her brother. And
Yeah. And you know, the reality is that this is still happening today to many families. You just turn on the news and you see what's happening in the Middle East, in some part of the world. This is a relatable story that sadly is still happening. There's somebody missing, there's somebody unaccounted for, and there's at home, there's a mother, there's a spouse, there's a sister, there are siblings waiting, there are children waiting.
waiting. And like you mentioned, the not knowing is the hardest part, right? Because
Yeah.
there's closure until you know for sure.
Yes, the dread, the feeling of, and every day, and you wake up and you go to sleep, if you can even sleep, and you wake up and you wonder what is this day going to bring.
Exactly. Now, Betty Ann, I know you've alluded to some of the lessons you've learned about yourself, about your family, but I wanted to ask, in writing this book, which decidedly is definitely different than a lot of the previous books you have authored before, what did you learn about yourself while putting this book together?
Well, first of all, I'm a writer by profession, and people think I just write about food, but I've been a writer for a long time, ever since the day I graduated from college. So I like to tell stories, whether verbally or written. I enjoy telling stories of about other people, about our lives, about what happened today. What did I learn about myself? I learned that if I push even harder, there's so much more I can write. You know, I have been writing advertising copy. I have been writing for different clients. I've been writing feature stories, lifestyle journalism. I've been writing stories about Philippine culture, Philippine history, Filipino personalities, and Philippine food. Well, it just so happens today we have social media, and Filipino food is more visible than any other topic. So people think that's all I write about. No, I write about so many things, specifically Filipino of interest to Filipinos and fans of Philippines. Well, I learned that if I push really hard, and for many months I did, I was staying up till 3 a.m. writing and rewriting and reading what I wrote and then writing again. I learned that if I push really, really hard, I can write a book like this. I can write a memoir. I've written cookbooks, which are intensive and a lot of work, but that comes easy to me. I'm happy to say, but writing a memoir, I didn't realize that I could endure. Um, there's a difficult part to it, part of the memoir, and part of the reason why I was hesitant to pursue this memoir writing was I was afraid. I feared the sadness that will surface from remembering my parents, from the memories, and from realizing how much I missed them. I was afraid of that. I was afraid to, I feared those feelings uh, of resurfacing. So at that time, I didn't think I was brave enough. And then later on, as the writing process went on, I realized I could do it. That I was brave enough to write about memories that hurt, and I was not emotionally scarred as I thought I would be.
I see. And you kind of already talked about this, but what was the most challenging aspect of writing this book? You mentioned sort of the fear of kind of missing your parents and getting into sort of the emotions of that. So in addition to that, I also wanted to ask, how did you, or when and how did you realize that you can write this book, that you actually had the courage and you were brave enough to do so?
Um, like just like what I said at the start of this interview, I realized there are not enough stories about Filipino heroines in this genre written by Filipino authors. There's not enough. If you go to the bookstores, whether here in America or even in the Philippines, there's not enough. And I feel that the next generation needs role models to look up. Yeah, I put myself back in the time when I was a young girl, and at that time I was raised in Tarlac. I went to school in Tarlac from elementary to high school, and my feeling even then was that there were not enough books I could read about Filipinas, about brave Filipina heroines. There were more books about Americans, and we didn't even have libraries in school or in the town where I lived. It's not like here in America, and a lot of Americans do not realize that outside of America, life is not the same. We don't have the same privileges, and that's what got to me. There's not enough written story uh, about Filipina heroines, and whether they are memoirs, whether they are graphic novels, whether they are films that you can stream on Netflix, whether they are comic books or in whatever medium. Not enough. There are, but some. And you hear the same stories over and over again about the same women. I mean, good for them, and we salute them and how brave they were. But uh, a majority of Filipinos do not know who Lulu Reyes was. And, put aside the fact that she was my mother, a majority of Filipinos do not know that there was a Filipina civilian who was awarded, one of the first, who was awarded the Medal of Freedom by the United States government twice. She got the medal 2 times. I mean, how many, and why? And the story behind that. So, yeah. So, and then I realized if I don't write my mother's story, who else will? Um, there, uh, there's only one more writer in our family, a cousin who I can think, but she's not. She it's different. This is my mother, I was thinking. And if I don't do this now, when else? So it's now is the time. And the lockdown during the pandemic was actually a blessing in disguise because by then I had accumulated 20 years worth of research and they were all just in front of me. We were locked in at the house. There was nothing else to do but cook and eat and watch the news, which was depressing. And then, like a jigsaw puzzle, I look at what I had, all the books, all the journals, all the notes. It's like staring at a jigsaw puzzle that's not put together. There's 1,000 pieces, and all you need to do is put it together to form a picture that other people can look at and ponder on and maybe learn. That's that. And then I realized that my mother's story was relatable to many. There were a lot of family values and family anecdotes that people can relate to. And I realized it maybe her courage, her bravery, her compassion and faith. Maybe this will inspire other people. And finally, I thought if I write this book and other people read it, even if it can inspire just one person, one family, one community, my mother would have liked that. So she lived every day of her life trying to make a difference in other people's life. That's who she was. So internally I said to myself, oh, why not? If it's badly written, then okay, then don't read it. But if it's a nice story, then yeah, please read it. So here we are.
Oh my gosh, Betty Ann, again, many thanks to you for kind of summoning up the courage to put this book together, and what you just shared about having the dedicated time during the global pandemic to really focus on this, like just really shows your resilience and your strength to be able to catalyze that again, another horrid experience, right? But from out of that, you created beauty, this beautiful narrative about your mother, about a woman's courage, because so many narratives about war are about, like, men shooting each other.
Correct. That's also another aspect. We need more female heroes, and uh, as one of my good friends wrote, Elena Mangaha said that I pointed a sharp eye on the heroism of women when normally during wars it's the men. The news is focused. You know, women do a lot more in the background without us realizing.
Yeah, for sure. And accomplishing these things in a different way, right? Like not through force and not through
Yeah.
violence, but like the way that your mother has been able to negotiate, there are stories in this and be able to get their way, but everybody feels like they've won something as well in that interaction. What has been the most edifying response so far that you have received from readers about this book?
Oh, the best response from my readers was this sentence in regards to the history part. I have never heard these stories in our Philippine history class when we were studying. So, I was able to put together facts. I did a lot of fact finding, by the way, over the years. The historical facts that I put out here were not just taken from the sky. If I found a nugget of wisdom, if I found a fact about World War II and this happening, and Jesuits doing this, and gasoline being smuggled to use for the relief crop. If I found that out, I went through several layers of fact checking to make sure that what I was retelling was true. So that's the most significant response from readers that has impressed me. I have never heard this story in Philippine history class. It makes me very happy to know that I shared something significant and that people can learn from. That is part of my goal. We write books not to be rich or not to be famous, but to tell a story. To tell a story that's uniquely ours, that people can learn from. A wise author once said, "It's not a book until somebody reads."
Yeah, so true for Betty Ann. Yeah, thank you again. And those are all the questions I have. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would like to say that I am thankful for the friendship and the support from my close friends and family that helped me. One of the most difficult things about writing this book was my mother was not around anymore. My mother and father weren't around anymore when I decided to write. And so were their friends. A lot of their friends had passed away. So getting firsthand information about her life during the war was very, very difficult. And I relied a lot on Corporal Robert Dow's um, reading suggestions. He gave me a list of books that he had read where authors firsthand had stories to tell about my mother. And that was the hard part, uh, rounding up, finding those books. 'Cause a lot of them were out of print. A lot of them were printed after World War II. And finding them in secondhand stores, looking for them online, looking for them from all sorts of resources was hard. So that's why by the time lockdown came around, I had all this information that I had gathered for 20 years. And I was thinking, what a waste if I don't do something with it. Yeah, so I had many different ideas how to put the message across. There are different mediums now that you can do, and I was hesitant to. I was, there was a lot of hesitation on my part, but what egged me on was that our younger generation needs role models, Filipino heroines that are hardly written about. And it's a story of not just bravery, but compassion and kindness and faith and hope. So it's a timeless story, and we need that right now. We need faith, we need hope, we need compassion.